In 792, the Byzantine army marched into Bulgaria under the command of Emperor Constantine VI. He was young, he was determined to prove himself, and he believed victory would silence his critics. Instead, one campaign would expose his weakness to his generals, to his enemies, and to his own mother. The defeat in Bulgaria did not just cost Byzantium soldiers, it cost Constantine his authority. And in Constantinople, when an emperor lost authority, he did not lose an election, he lost his eyes. This is how Constantine VI lost Bulgaria and his throne. This story reveals how a dynasty built on battlefield credibility fractured inside a palace because legitimacy in Byzantium was not but a performance that could fail in a single afternoon. Constantine inherited an empire trained to obey decisive emperors, but he entered adulthood trapped between an ambitious mother, suspicious officers, and a frontier enemy probing for weakness. He would gamble on a public victory, then spend 5 years trying to repair the optics of failure with force, loyalties, and dangerous compromises until Irene turned stability into a weapon and the court delivered its final verdict. Constantine VI had worn the title of emperor since childhood, but everyone who mattered remembered who made decisions. Irene of Athens, the Isaurian emperors before him, Leo III and Constantine V had welded military success to imperial authority, rewarding soldiers, punishing dissent, and treating hesitation as treason. Constantine inherited their institutions and their expectations, but not their aura. In councils where generals waited for instructions, a hesitation could look like incompetence. In a system that read divine favor through outcomes, youth was not sympathy, it was risk. Irene understood that risk and managed it like a regime. She sat at the center of appointments, gifts, and promotions. Petitions flowed to her seal. In 787, she sponsored the council that restored the veneration of icons, gaining allies among bishops and monks who had suffered under iconoclast policy. That religious settlement was also political insurance, a network that could frame her as protector of orthodoxy if the palace shook. Constantine grew up watching power move through his mother's private meetings, not through his own commands. The army, meanwhile, was not a passive audience. The tagmata, elite regiments stationed near Constantinople, were professionals with long memories shaped by Constantine V's relentless campaigning. They expected an emperor who could take the field, hold formation, and reward discipline. Instead, they saw a ruler coached and constrained. In 790, that impatience erupted. Soldiers proclaimed Constantine sole ruler and pushed Irene aside. It was a public military vote of no confidence, proof that Constantine could be elevated, but also that he could be replaced. That moment forced a choice on Constantine: remain a son managed by a court or become the kind of emperor the army would follow into danger. Bulgaria offered the cleanest stage. North of the Thracian frontier, Kardam led a state that had learned to survive Byzantium by reading its signals, raiding when the empire looked divided, negotiating when it looked unified. Bulgaria did not need to destroy Byzantium, it needed to make Byzantium pay for uncertainty. Each raid tested whether imperial threats were real or ceremonial. Structurally, Constantinople still held advantages. Fortresses that anchored supply lines, experienced officers, and a bureaucracy that could move grain and pay. A disciplined campaign could have contained Kardam and restored the frontier's psychology, Byzantium as the inevitable power. But containment was not Constantine's emotional need. He needed something visible, a victory that would echo back to the capital louder than his mother's influence, louder than the army's doubts, louder than the memory of 790. In the summer of 792, Constantine led the army to a fortified camp near Marcellae, close enough to force a Bulgarian response, but safe enough to avoid surprise. It was an emperor's stage, the imperial standard planted where soldiers could see it, officers summoned to briefings, scouts reporting movement beyond reach. Kardam did not offer the decisive battle Constantine wanted. Bulgarian forces probed, taunted, withdrew, inviting impatience, stretching nerves, tempting mistakes. Days of standoff turned the question into humiliation. Was the emperor unable to compel combat? Inside the camp, the pressure became personal. Cautious commanders argued for holding position, for letting Bulgaria exhaust itself against Byzantine logistics and fortifications. Constantine heard something else, that he was afraid, that he was hiding behind walls like a child behind a guardian. Glory was becoming a deadline. He overruled caution and ordered the army out of its defensible posture to force engagement. It was not cartoon bravado, it was legitimacy anxiety, translated into an operational decision, choosing spectacle over advantage. Once the Byzantines moved, the campaign stopped being a demonstration and became a test. Formations that held under controlled conditions began to fragment under speed and uneven ground. Units drifted, commands lagged. Bulgarian forces struck where coordination failed, punishing the separated and avoiding the strong. The chain reaction was brutal. A line becomes a series of isolated fights become panic. When messages cannot move, rumor becomes command. In that environment, the emperor's next decision would define not just the battle, but the reign. Constantine realized the formation was compromised and withdrew with the imperial guard. In purely tactical terms, protecting the emperor was rational. An emperor captured could collapse the state. But the battlefield did not interpret rationality, it interpreted symbols. Soldiers saw the imperial banner moving away and read it as abandonment. Morale broke in the most Byzantine way, not simply fear of death, but fear that the emperor had lost divine favor. Senior officers fell. The imperial treasury and baggage were captured. Bulgaria gained money, prisoners, and the larger prize, proof that Byzantium could be made to run. The defeat hit Constantinople like a sealed indictment. Courtiers did not debate casualties, they measured consequences. A victorious emperor could punish rivals, a defeated emperor invited them. Officers who had once backed Constantine in 790 recalculated what defending him would cost. Clerics who had tolerated his autonomy wondered whether stability required Irene's steady hand. And Irene, now returned to influence, did not need to shout. She needed to wait, to let Marcellae keep speaking each time Constantine issued an order and someone paused before obeying. Constantine tried to regain control through the levers available to a doubted ruler: promotions, demotions, and public signals. Yet each move advertised insecurity. He even made a choice that stunned the court, bringing Irene back and crowning her co-emperor in 792, an attempt to buy internal peace and perhaps neutralize her. Instead, it read as capitulation. The same man who had marched north to prove independence now shared power with the figure he was supposed to outgrow. In Byzantium, shared sovereignty was not teamwork. It was a confession that authority was contested. The conflict between mother and son widened into factions. Irene's supporters framed her as the guarantor of order. The woman who had managed the state healed the church's icon conflict and could keep the army paid. Constantine's circle needed him to look decisive, but decisive actions carried risk when loyalty was uncertain. If he punished too harshly, he provoked conspiracies. If he forgave, he encouraged them. Every council meeting became a silent referendum. Every signed decree was scanned for whose names appeared as witnesses and whose did not. Then Constantine made a private decision that detonated publicly. In 795, he divorced his wife Maria of Amnia and married Theodote, a lady-in-waiting, while Maria was forced into a convent. The church's strict voices treated it as adulterous. The Mochian controversy, and the most uncompromising monks, including Theodore the Studate, condemned the marriage and resisted imperial pressure. Letters moved from monasteries to sympathetic officials, turning moral outrage into political alignment. Constantine needed an heir and a fresh start. Instead, he handed Irene a new coalition, clerics and moralists now angry at the emperor. How much Irene planned from the beginning is debated. Some readings paint her as a calculating architect, exploiting each stumble to reach sole power. Others see a court spiraling after Marcellae, where factions dragged her forward as the only plausible anchor. But the consequence is the same. Constantine's authority became conditional, negotiated day by day with groups that could withdraw support. In Byzantium, that condition was lethal. Once the court believed an emperor might fall, every ambitious man had to decide whether to fall with him. By 797, Irene's network was ready to turn doubt into action. The plot required more than gossip, it needed control of bodies. Key officials were secured, palace access managed, and crucially, units in or near the capital leaned toward Irene. A coup in Byzantium was not a single dramatic strike, it was a sequence of doors that opened or stayed shut. When Constantine attempted to move against her, he found his messengers intercepted, his orders delayed, his supporters isolated. Palace, that machinery of legitimacy had changed hands while he still held the title. Constantine was seized. The decisive moment was not a battle, but a custody transfer, guards choosing which sovereign their oath now described. He was taken to a chamber where the sentence matched the crime as Byzantines understood it. An emperor who could not command would not command again. Blinding was political engineering, designed to make him unfit to rule without turning him into a martyr by execution. Ordered under Irene's authority, it was also a symbolic reversal. The man whose retreat had been seen on a battlefield now lost sight forever under his mother's regime. Irene became sole ruler, and the empire absorbed the shock as it always did, by adapting its behavior to the new reality. Bulgaria, watching closely, learned that Byzantium's frontier posture depended on internal legitimacy. Marcellae did not end the empire, but it ended a sense of unquestioned dominance in the Balkans. Bulgarian confidence grew, and Byzantium's diplomacy increasingly acknowledged a rival that could not simply be disciplined. The larger system lesson was darker. Even sophisticated institutions, disciplined armies, and resilient bureaucracy could be unmade by a crisis of belief. In 792, Constantine gambled for authority and lost. In 797, the state enforced its rule that weakness at the top